Welcome. A big round of applause again for all of you for coming in the morning and for being at camp. We're really excited to have Sierra Ware, Exulansic, and she's going to be speaking on trans rights, sex body, gendered soul, discussion of how contemporary patriarchal ideology marginalizes physical differences to center social categories, disorienting us from our embodied reality.
So I wanted to start kind of with a brief overview of, what is gender for the trans community and the gender community and the gender industry versus sex. And so you have the idea that we have, which is that women are adult human females. That's the idea that dictionaries had for some time. It's the idea that basic logic has, that there's a category of humans that has a capacity other humans don't. And that capacity is to give birth, to get pregnant and give birth, and to reproduce using the large gametes. So that's how we orient ourselves, is in the physicality of our biology and what we can do with it. And that's often said that we're reducing women to our sex category. We're obviously not doing that. Women are adult, female human. The adult human part is very important for that, but so is the female part. In gender ideology, they have separated the concept of a woman from the concept of being an adult female human. And for that, they've done that so that adult male humans can access womanhood and can claim to be a woman and can be legally women. My opinion is, anyway, that this started with disorders of sexual development, otherwise known as intersex disorders, which are naturally occurring in any human society, sometimes more often in some societies, depending on local genetics and practices, and sometimes not. And so in order to accommodate this naturally occurring disability, the medical industry said that, sometimes they're going to be women and sometimes they're going to be men, and it's actually not connected to their sex category, so that we can legally define some adult male humans as women in order to accommodate this phenomenon where they end up looking very womanly through no fault of their own, and there's nothing we can do about that. And part of this was to predict basically to try to prevent homosexuals. So if you label a child as a male, then that criminalizes the male-to-male sexual interactions in a context where that's a criminal act. So that's one of their motivations for wanting to say that these adult male humans are women. It's because they were trying to not further punish them for having a disability. And so it was a noble goal, but it created a situation where womanhood was divorced from our sex category, and that's harmed women severely. And nobody thought about that. Nobody really considered the impact on women, because it was all about centering these males and what's best for them, as usual. And from there, we moved on to repackaging that ideology that if you have a certain hormonal situation, if you have a certain appearance, if you really identify a certain way, if you're somehow different from the other men, you should be then grouped in with the women. That's more fair to you in some way. And so that's been repackaged and sold to men who don't have any sort of disability, but who, for sexual fetish reasons or because they're being abused by their parents, in the case of Jess Jennings, that's a way for them to have a pathway into womanhood if that's what they want. And so then now we have the current situation of gender ideology. And then more recently from there, they've mined some new identities out of the ground, and that would be non-binitarianism. And so whereas before we were trying to go from male to female and from female to male, and I call that trans classic and Our Lady of the Perpetual Hormone Replacement Therapy, this idea that I have some need to be on these other hormones. I have a need to look different. It's a biological need. I'm a male, but I have a need to be female in some way. Now it's the transition is female to less female or male to less male. And so that's where you get the people who are saying, well, I'm not a woman and I'm not a man. I'm non-binary. Men and women both have nipples, so I shouldn't have nipples. I'm a genius, So that's kind of the point of a non-binary transition, and why you see them going in weird ways, like the salmation surgery. I'm not sure who's heard of that. That's where you have both modes enabled. So like you have the penis-sparing vaginoplasty or the vagina-sparing phalloplasty, and so they're trying to get as many. And I've heard of some people even getting like 2 installed, because why not? Why not? Why not just be George Washington with the 30 goddamn dicks? I don't know who's seen that meme, but some people have. Okay. But you know, why not? So we have this like infinite, like open field of body modification in the pursuit of your identity. And you know, if you're mentally ill and you're motivated by things that you're not aware of because you're mentally ill, because you're immature and you don't have that metacognitive awareness to look at yourself and recognize that your motivation is sexual, you know, that you want to fulfill a sexual fantasy. Essentially, that's what it is. You have a fantasy about a sexual future that you could have, and you're going to go towards it. So that's ultimately a big motivation, or that your motivation is to be different. I'm not like other girls, treat me differently so that I don't feel anxious about how you're going to treat me based on the fact that I am in fact a girl and I know that I'm a girl. So there's these shifting motivations, but ultimately it's about being able to sell medical products to people who don't need them. Yep. And regardless of the harm that creates. And so the medical pathway has to be enabled by the legal pathway. Otherwise, what's the point of mutilating your body and looking weird and different if you're just going to have to be treated the same? So if we can get rid of the legal pathway to womanhood, which was created initially to accommodate a disability, unreasonably, I posit. So we shouldn't unreasonably accommodate disabilities. We should reasonably accommodate to the extent we can. But people, in order to accommodate that, we created this legal pathway where we divorce sex from gender. And from there, we end up with this idea that female-only spaces are actually women's-only spaces, and so it's okay to put men in them somehow. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Adriana Smith case. I don't know who's familiar with that. That's the case in, I think, Georgia, where a woman actually died and then was kept, not kept alive, but kept warm, kept on simmer for a while so that her 9-week-old fetus could try to gestate. And that fetus was recently removed from her body because she was decomposing and it was not doing well, as you can imagine. And so far, they haven't announced that it passed away, so they're now doing keeping it alive in NICU. But its level of disability is not known. It was reported that it had hydrocephalus. You know, it's a delicate process to try to maintain a pregnancy. And when you're doing that on a lot of drugs in a body where the brain can't even keep the mother alive, it's going to be very unpredictable. And so, but she generally, before she died, she had a right to refuse medical care. And her family, as next of kin, had a right to refuse her medical care. But once she was declared brain dead, the state actually was able to commandeer her body, essentially, and continue providing this care because at that point, she had no identity, but her femaleness remained. And so the state was able to colonize her femaleness and farm it, which is ultimately the state's goal, because the state's goal is to get more workers and more people and more bodies and more soldiers. And that's why they want to give medals to women who have 6 kids, or whatever Trump is saying, is because ultimately that's the tension, is that we are fighting a state that's trying to farm us because we have a capacity that men don't, and they need it. And so that's kind of like the feminist struggle is to resist that commodification and being farmed. And so this centering of identity over the sexed body and its traits, I believe is about trying to divorce the rights of female people from the identity havers. And so that they further commodify us. They can do things like take over our bodies literally and force us to breed. And I worry that this might be, you know, a stepping stone to getting in a situation where you have this is some sort of punishment for a crime, or otherwise that they would, for instance, I mean, they've proposed like executing women for seeking abortions. And so if you're allowed to execute a woman and you're allowed to take over her corpse and impregnate her and maintain a pregnancy in her, it just seems like natural that they would start doing that they would start coming up with reasons to execute women who could then be impregnated. And then we have like an Iranian situation where women are getting raped before they die because it's what the state wants. And so I wanted to talk a little bit also about the dark side of Scretti from this aspect. And Scretti was this decision that upheld the Tennessee ban on gender-affirming care for minors. But part of that decision that I read was that this idea that if you discriminate against people based on an aspect of femaleness, it's not the same as discriminating against females. And I think that's really dangerous, because ultimately we only have aspects of our femaleness. So we are female, and we can say that we are female, but rarely is a law that targets females just targeting all females. It's usually targeting us based on an aspect of our femaleness. So if we say that that's not discrimination against femaleness, that really sets back women's rights, I think. And so I worry about that. Like if they ban women who are able to become pregnant from voting, is that discrimination against women under Scretti? It seems like not. So I'm not sure what's protecting us at that point. If that's said that it's not discrimination on the basis of sex to deny us our ability to vote if we might be pregnant at the time, or if it might endanger a fetus in some way, is that discrimination under the 19th Amendment? I would say yes, because it's discrimination on the basis of our sex capacities. But Scretti says no, and so that's concerning to me. Another example of divorcing our identity as women, as adult female humans, from the capacities and physicality of our body, which is what we actually need protection based on. And so I talked a little bit already about what identities are possible in the Church of Trans. So I'd mentioned the Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. That's the intersex contingent where they say, I developed wrong, I was conceived wrong in some way, and that's why I get to be a male woman. That's why my male womanhood is valid. It's because I was born different. Our Lady of Perpetual Hormone Replacement is the men who feel different, and that's why their male womanhood is valid, is because they feel different or they've taken steps to look different from other men, and so then that means they should be able to jump the category. And then non-binitarianism is I feel less like a man, and so I'm not a man. I may not be a woman, but I'm definitely not a man. Don't treat me like one, and let me go where I want. Some other ones that I've talked about a little bit, discipleship of the disaffected would be the they/them users who are not, who might be that way due to, for instance, detransition. So they're very different, but they're not ready to fully come out of it. But they still don't feel realigned with their sex. So you might have people in that group, or people who had other congenital issues who want to be recognized as different due to their physicality. And so I just want to mention them briefly. And then you also have the dissociative identity group, where they believe that they're multiple people, and that's why they're using they/them. And so taken to that's logical conclusion, if we're respecting identity, then that would open a whole new door of insanity. But some of them have actually suggested that. As radical feminists, we are trying to figure out how society ended up in a situation where women are being farmed, where we're being privatized and sold off to individual men, for instance, or otherwise treated as a public state-owned commodity. And how do we fix that? And feminism, radical feminism, tends to center that in our femaleness as the axis of our oppression, and the way that we are held back, held down, discouraged from seeing ourselves as our own category, and ultimately gaslit about why we are struggling, why we're in pain, why we don't have the same access to resources, why the forces that be, the powers that be, are trying to push us in the direction of OnlyFans, of marriage and family, of different avenues of accessing our reproductive capacities in labor, our sexual capacities in labor, our domestic capacities in labor. By centering the physicality, radical feminism has historically been able to work for what women need as individuals in terms of marriage, dissolution rights, property rights, things that enable us to not just be a commodity of the state, a commodity of men, but to be our own independent individuals and to have an independent identity within the state. And one of the ways that they've done that is by stigmatizing discussion of femaleness and female biology and female physicality. And historically, that has included attacks on midwifery and the knowledge of women that has been transmitted generationally that derives in large part from our own experiences as well as our own communication about it. In Lear's presentation, she mentioned that the fastest way to empower a woman to control her life and to not be a slave to her reproductive biology is to teach her to read and to teach her about her body, enable her to learn about her body and how to control it, and how to be her own support in that way. And so in order to hide that knowledge, it was commandeered by the state, by medical licensing boards, and the ability of women to help each other, has been limited. In an extreme case, if you look at Afghanistan, the women there are not allowed to see a male doctor, and they're also not allowed to become doctors. So that is a very extreme example of the direction that this sort of commodification can go and privatization of women's bodies can go, is that we end up in a situation where we actually have no idea how our bodies work, and we're at complete mercy of male sexual impulses and desires, and then we're just kept at home. You know, they're not even allowed to sing or to speak in public and be overheard. So they're just completely isolated from each other, and they're not allowed to to form communities that are based on the fact that they are adult female humans, and to communicate about what it means that they're adult female humans in a society that wants to farm them. And so that is something that states predictably do to suppress radical feminist organizing and women's fundamental awareness of the fact that our physical bodies give us certain needs, give us certain trajectories in life that need to be supported in certain ways. And ultimately, that's so that we don't have the control over when we have children, who we have children with, how we raise those children, and then what happens to those children. So they're trying to just to commodify us. And so in terms of embodied wisdom that can be passed down, it cannot ever be truly destroyed, because ultimately we all have something called lived experience. And that's not a social fantasy. You can't get lived experience by putting on a costume and pretending. That's not lived experience. You're pretending. Lived experience is when you're actually the thing. You actually have the physiology of the physical entity, the biology of the kind of person in question. And so as women, we have lived experience of womanhood, of femaleness. We understand the needs of femaleness. We understand the perspective of a person growing up and coming up in this world with femaleness, and we have a direct experience of at least how some women in the society are treated, and how people who are have trait femaleness, which by people I mean women and girls, I do not mean males, ever, how they are affected by the fact that they have female biology, which has its own predispositions, in a society that has attitudes about female biology and people with it. And so there will always be a tension. They will never win as long as there are actual women, which, you know, then gets into the entire other area of trying to divorce the aspects of femaleness from individuals entirely. And then you get into artificial wombs, which, you know, some people have thought that's like a feminist goal. I don't personally agree. I think that's very scary, because you are learning about the world from your experience traveling around with your mother and hearing her talk. Even before you're actually born, you're learning about the world. You're learning how to be. You're learning about rhythms on a fundamental cellular programmable level. And I just don't think that we're going to be able to recreate that with AI robots and plastic bags of amniotic fluid. I don't see it happening. But if things keep trending the way they're going, they're going to try. They're going to keep trying. You know, they're already, they do womb transplants and these sort of like drug-facilitated impregnation events. Ultimately, the child is the most affected by these experiments and has the least say over them, and will have to live with the effects of it. Okay. And so now I kind of want to shift into talking about why lying to people, why confusing them, why separating you from knowledge of your body enables them to sell you things. So I have this quote up here that if you give a woman a fish, you feed her for a day. If you teach her to fish, you feed her for a lifetime. But if you convince her she's a fish, you can sell her all sorts of drugs and surgeries. Can I be a mermaid? They say it's ridiculous. I've wanted to be a mermaid since I was 12. I have diaries showing that I identified as a mermaid from an early age. They use tilapia skin. They use shark skin in these surgeries. Why can't I be a mermaid? It's only a matter of time, you know. I think so too. I think I'm at risk. People who identify as fish, there's not even any statistics of our oppression. They'll defuse bombs underneath the ocean. That's why they should do it. It's military readiness. But do they allow trans fish? Okay. And so in pursuit of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about something I've been dealing with personally that relates to gender affirming care and this broader topic of how they hurt people and then they lie to you and hide that from you, and in order to sell you additional products and in order to conceal what they did. I was trans-identifying for a number of years, and I have a degree in gender and women's studies from UC Berkeley, from the Judith Butler Hellmouth, and
that's some bonus.
Yeah.
Talk about a survivor.
Barely. I almost got sucked into feminism permanently. It's non-binary feminism is feminism. So while I was doing that, I was on a hormone therapy, and it was not testosterone, but it was a mixture of progestins, including a progestin that's highly androgenic and is about as androgenic as DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone, and is derived from a testosterone, a form of testosterone called nortestosterone, 19-nortestosterone, but is classed as a progestin. So they can sell it to women, basically, because testosterone is not approved for any use in women. So they tweak this one. They say, well, it's a progestin now, and that makes it the same as what your body makes. No. And then they give it to you, and good luck. And so this drug works in the brain by suppressing, and this is how birth control, hormonal birth control generally works. If you weren't aware, I wasn't aware until I was like quite a bit older. It suppresses the function of glands in the brain. It's also how puberty blockers work, by the way. It suppresses function of the glands in the brain, which suppresses production of multiple hormones. GnRH is one, luteinizing hormone is one, follicle stimulating hormone is one. And so those hormones do stuff in the brain, do stuff in the nervous system, do stuff elsewhere in the body that we don't really fully understand. Like, we know that the dysregulation of these hormones is implicated in the development of various problems like motor disorders and dementia. We know that as those systems become dysregulated with age, people are more likely to develop problems. And so we know that it doesn't just cause ovulation, and so maybe messing with it is probably something we should reconsider or look into a little bit more deeply. My take anyway. And so those hormones then go to the gonads and would normally cause the gonads to be producing a complex cycle, a complex rhythm of progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen, and some other stuff. And so it suppresses those basically when you're on the kind that I was, gender affirming menstrual suppression, it suppresses that to menopausal levels. So you have menopausal symptoms and effects. And so one of the effects for me, because I was also young at the time, and my growth plates had not fused, I was still growing. I grew like 1.5 inches between when I started college and when I was done. And I started this in the middle of college. Because that was still open. Growth plates are a strip of cartilage in the bone. And that cartilage is what allows the bone to get longer. And that cartilage slowly mineralizes. And it starts mineralizing in early adolescence, but it finishes in a staggered manner at different ages for different people, based on a variety of things, because sex hormones also interact with things like growth hormone. It depends on things like nutritional status. It depends on various factors, but it especially depends on estrogen, and if you have access to estrogen at the right time, and as well as the minerals that need to be put into the cartilage to harden it. And then as it's hardening, it's a slow process, it's still vulnerable to injury, especially near the end of that mineralization process. And depending on the growth plate, especially like the femur growth plate, that's one of the later ones to mineralize and can be still mineralizing into the early 20s, which in my case it was. So essentially what happened is that they lowered my estrogen drastically. And then they said, well, this drug can cause bone loss because you're lowering your estrogen. So go do weight-bearing exercise to keep your bones strong. So they sent me to the gym to do weight-bearing exercise while they have me on a drug that's lowering my bone density. It's pulling minerals out of my bone and mineralizing growth plates. And it's also preventing new minerals from being laid down at the same time. These things are both happening because of the age I was. Even though I was an adult, I was still young. I was still developing. I wasn't a woman yet. I wasn't fully a woman. I was still a young woman. I was a girl. I was not mature yet. I wasn't done cooking. So as I'm doing this, what's happening then is you have this weakened growth plate, and it starts to actually shift. And then in response to that, to prevent a full fracture along the growth plate, it kind of just, it's trying to harden as it's shifting, essentially. And so in my case, what happened is that, and this happens a lot, and I feel like a lot more people are walking around in this. I think this is what's wrong with Kim Petras, for instance. I've talked about his hip issues. I suspect this happened to him too. The femur is supposed to be a ball shape so that it can be in the femur socket. And if this is happening, it actually changes the head of the femur shape to be more of just not a sphere. And so that causes it to bump and pinch some structures around the hip that are supposed to keep it in. And so that causes progressive damage. And so this happened. I remembered this happening. I remember when I started talking about this happening and telling them, it felt like something changed. And now my hip went forward when I was straight. And that it was like kind of L-shaped now. Like I just feel it. And it's in my records. I told them for 15 years. They just figured it out last month, finally. Not even the first MRI. And they finally saw it. And I suspect that they saw it because the robot saw it. So AI now is suggesting diagnoses, and AI is really good at suggesting diagnoses and not considering past misdiagnoses as evidence. Human doctors consider past misdiagnoses as evidence. AI doesn't. So AI was like, oh, your femur's not the right shape.
AI calls it.
Yeah. But in between those times, I was told I was sitting wrong. If I just had correct ergonomics, it would be fixed, because I tend to like to sit kind of like this, because my femur's not the right shape. And if I sit normally, it kind of hurts. So I think it just in any length of time, and basically any position, it's uncomfortable. And so over time, because of that chronic pinching and inflammation, it caused degradation of the cartilage and the structure called the labrum. And so that over time, because of the inflammation, eventually causes it to tear. And so the labrum kind of acts as a suction cup. So when it's torn, it doesn't work as a suction cup anymore. And it has to be fixed. And so they just kind of just kept like telling me injections to treat the symptoms, selling me, petroleum-based pharmaceutical products, because, we can't just treat pain anymore for some reason. And telling me various, behavioral interventions, like it was my fault, instead of just identifying the problem that they caused. That was a very predictable outcome of the treatments they gave me, that they were doing not in a standard way. Like, you're not supposed to give somebody Depo-Provera for, it's supposed to be a last resort medication, period, especially if you're just giving it for contraception, which it was not what I was being given it for. I was given that and like a couple others at the same time, and that's just not what you do with contraception. It was, they were trying to sandblast my brain so that I would stop being reminded every month that I'm a female. So they were trying to maximize a side effect, and hoping for the best. But even if you put them on it, you're not supposed to leave them on it for more than like 2 years because of the bone loss effects, which they've known about for some time. And I was on it for like 4 years with a significant overlap with the other one that's derived from the nortestosterone. And so it just had effects. So at the same time that they're giving you these girls, these drugs that are causing these bone changes, and then ignoring the pain that they start presenting with. I mean, there's a lot of commentary that these trans marches tend to have a lot of canes and wheelchairs. Yeah. There's a reason for that. And a lot of them don't know. It's osteoporosis, but it's also bone remodeling and functional impairment from the bone remodeling that happens. And they likely don't know why they hurt so much, or they think they have some social contagion idea of why they hurt so much. Like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is really popular right now to claim. Because and it makes sense. I have widespread joint pain. Maybe it is Ehlers-Danlos, but no, you have widespread joint pain because your hormones were fucked with before your growth plates were closed, and you have growth plates all over your body. Good luck. That's what they're doing to girls. And then at the same time, these hormones, especially like the progestins, they interact with cartilage. So they change the shape of my bone in my hip changed, and it started causing chronic inflammation. But at the same time, the drugs that caused that change to happen also help to reduce the impact of the change by preventing an enzyme that causes cartilage to break down that's promoted by estrogen. So it's like at that point, and this is also in my records, I tried to stop at one point, and the pain got a lot worse, and so they put me back on it at a higher dose. And now in retrospect, I can understand why. It's an example of how when they harm people, they don't necessarily warn you. They don't educate you as to how these drugs are even working. They may not have any idea how they're working. And so they're just messing up your health in order to then sell you things by denying the fact that they've made you disabled, fundamentally, and trying to convince you that the actual problem is that you don't accept that you're the same as everyone else, and you need to accept that you're the same as them and to do the same things that they do. And if you do these same things that other people do, you'll be fine. But if your bones are the wrong shape, that doesn't work, fundamentally. So it's another example of denying disability, denying difference, denying physicality in order to sell products and in order to center identity and wanting to encourage you to identify as a person that doesn't have a chronic problem that needs treatment. So what's the call to action at the end of this is that taking care of yourself, believing what your body's telling you, believing that your pain is not normal, it's not supposed to be there, it's not your fault, and actually fighting to be recognized and taken seriously can prevent a lot of problem and hardship. You know, I talk to a lot of much younger detransitioners a lot, and they get dismissed when they present and talk about their pain, and they get told it's no big deal, and they don't have the full education about what was done to them and what implications it has, because a lot of doctors are just not aware, or they don't care enough. I don't know. It's hard. Sorry. but I'm trying to get this information out there so that women understand that your physicality doesn't go away just because it's not acknowledged by a patriarchal authority figure like a doctor. And you're the one who's going to have to live with it. You're the one who's going to have to be walking around on it. And so I hope that you take from that self-care is radical, believing yourself is radical, as is believing other women, seeing other women, acknowledging other women's pain. If you see someone walking weird, commenting on it, because they might not understand that is visible and it matters and it can indicate things. And just acknowledging it, even if a woman doesn't understand why she's in pain, why she's struggling, especially if she feels apologetic about the fact that she can't meet expectations due to her physical limitations. I just encourage you guys to be the support system that you needed when you were mistreated, and I'm sure all of you have stories. So thank you. That's the end.